The night Kyle Ashbourne woke from his 1,000-year slumber, every wolf on the planet felt it in their bones. It was not a gentle awakening, not the peaceful stirring of a sleeper greeting dawn. It was violence incarnate, a rupture in the fabric of reality itself, as if the universe had been holding its breath for 10 centuries and finally gasped. In observatories across the world, astronomers would later report an inexplicable phenomenon where certain stars appeared to vibrate in their fixed positions for exactly 7 seconds. Seismographs registered tremors that followed no fault lines. And in the hidden communities where werewolves lived their secret lives, every single wolf, from the most powerful alpha to the weakest omega, from newborn pups to ancient elders, felt their hearts stop and restart in perfect synchronization. They did not understand what had happened. They could not have understood. The oldest living wolves were barely 200 years old, and the event they had just experienced belonged to an age when their kind still believed in gods. High in the eternal mountains, in a cave system so remote that even the most adventurous climbers had never found it, Kyle Ashbourne opened eyes that had been closed since before the pyramids were young. The first sensation was pain, not physical, but existential, the agony of a soul that had chosen oblivion and been dragged back against its will. The second sensation was fury. Someone had called him. Someone had reached, through the carefully constructed barriers of his hibernation, through the layers of magic and grief and deliberate forgetting, and pulled him back into a world he had abandoned. The third sensation, the one that made him surge to his feet, despite muscles that had not moved in a millennium, was recognition. The call had not been random. It had been specific, desperate. And worst of all, it had been the exact frequency of a soul in mortal peril, the kind of distress that is most fundamental, nature as an alpha made impossible to ignore. If you are enjoying this journey into a world where legends walk again and ancient powers stir from their rest, please take a moment to like this video and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your engagement helps these stories reach others who crave tales of supernatural romance and epic destiny. Kyle stumbled from his cave into moonlight that felt wrong, too bright, too clear, filtered through an atmosphere that tasted different than he remembered. His body was exactly as it had been when he entered hibernation, not a day older in appearance, still bearing the scars of battles fought when the world was young. But he was not unchanged. 1,000 years of dreams had eroded parts of him, smoothed away edges he once thought permanent, and filled the spaces where his heart used to be with something cold and vast and empty. He remembered why he had chosen sleep. He remembered Aldrich, his true mate, dead in his arms from a betrayal Kyle had been too blind to prevent. He remembered the wars that followed, the rivers of blood, the way he had almost destroyed everything he built in his grief. And he remembered making the choice to remove himself from the equation, to take his power and his pain and bury them both where they could hurt no one ever again. But now, he was awake, and the call that had woken him was still resonating in his chest, like a second heartbeat, pulling him toward something he did not want to face. Kyle tested his connection to the pack bonds and found nothing. Of course there was nothing. Every wolf he had known was dust. Every alliance he had forged was forgotten. He was a ghost in his own legend, and from what he could sense in the ambient magic around him, his legend had not aged well. The world felt wrong. The energy of wolfkind twisted in ways that made his hackles rise. Something had gone terribly, fundamentally wrong in the centuries of his absence. He should go back to sleep. He should return to his cave, rebuild his barriers, and let whatever crisis had called him resolve itself without his interference. He had earned his rest. He had paid for his peace with everything he was. But even as he thought it, his body was already moving, following the resonance of that call down the mountain, because some things were stronger than choice, stronger than will, stronger even than the desire for oblivion. He was an alpha, the first alpha, and somewhere in the world below, someone was screaming for help in a voice his soul recognized even though his mind knew it was impossible. 300 miles away, in the Silver Paw Pack territory, Ezra Moonwhisper was probably going to die. And the unfairness of it was almost worse than the fear. He had not done anything wrong. He had not broken any laws that mattered. Only the cruel regulations that the Council of 7 Alphas had imposed to keep Omegas in their place. All he had done was try to save lives, to use his healing gift to cure the pups who had contracted silver sickness from the contaminated water the Council refused to acknowledge. He had performed the healing ritual in secret, away from prying eyes, using only the old methods his grandmother had taught him before she died. But someone had seen. Someone had reported him. And now he was kneeling in the central square of his packlands with silver chains burning his wrists, while Alpha Darius Silverpaw, the cruelest of the 7, decided his fate. The gathered crowd was silent, which was somehow worse than if they had been jeering. These were Ezra's packmates, wolves he had grown up with, wolves he had healed and helped and cared for. But they would not meet his eyes. They could not help him. To speak in his defense would mean sharing his punishment. And under Darius's rule, punishment was creative and permanent. Ezra had seen too many broken wolves to blame them for their silence. He only wished he was brave enough not to be terrified. His hands were shaking despite his efforts to still them, and he could feel his wolf whimpering inside his mind, wanting to submit, to beg, to do anything that might make this stop. Darius circled him slowly, deliberately, making sure every wolf present understood the spectacle. He was everything an alpha was supposed to be in the modern age. Massive, powerful, with eyes that held no mercy, and a smile that promised pain. The Silverpaw Alpha had built his reputation on breaking rebellious Omegas, on making examples that kept the rest of his pack in line. He wore his cruelty like other wolves wore their rank, openly and proudly. "You understand what you have done, Omega?" His voice carried across the silent square, and Ezra hated how it made him flinch. "You practiced forbidden magic. You accessed powers that Omegas are not permitted to touch. You placed yourself above the laws that keep our society stable." Ezra wanted to say that there was nothing forbidden about healing magic, that the laws against Omegas using their gifts were less than a century old, that the society Darius claimed to protect was rotten to its core. But his voice would not work. His courage, which had felt so certain in the darkness of the healing circle, had abandoned him in the face of actual consequence. He managed only a whisper. "The pups were dying. I had to help them. You had to obey." Darius corrected, and the casual way he said it was chilling. "That is the only thing an Omega has to do. Obey your Alpha. Obey the Council. Obey the natural order that has kept our kind safe for thousands of years." He gestured to the crowd. "Let this be a lesson. Let every Omega here understand what happens when you forget your place. Your gifts are not yours to use as you see fit. Your magic belongs to your pack, to be accessed only with permission, only under supervision, only in ways that serve the hierarchy that protects us all." It was such an obvious lie that Ezra almost laughed, which would have been hysteria rather than humor. There was no ancient natural order. The council system was barely 300 years old, and the laws restricting Omega magic were even younger. But pointing that out would only make things worse, and things were already worse enough. Darius had drawn a silver blade, and Ezra knew what came next. The severing ritual. They were going to cut away his connection to his magic, leave him hollow and empty. A walking corpse who would serve as a warning to anyone else who thought about stepping out of line. In desperation, Ezra did something he had never done before. He reached out with his magic, not toward the wolves around him, but toward something older, something he had only ever sensed in fragments during the full moon. His grandmother had called it the memory of the first, the echo of the original Alpha, whose power had birthed their entire species. She had told him stories, legends really, about Kyle Ashbourne, the Alpha who had united the scattered packs and taught them to be more than monsters. Stories about a time when Omegas were honored as healers and seers, when strength was measured by what you built rather than who you dominated. Fairy tales, probably. Wishful thinking from a dying old woman, but Ezra was out of options. And even fairy tales were better than nothing. Please, he thought, pushing the prayer out into the universe with every scrap of magic he had left. Please, if you are real, If any of the stories are true, please help us. We have forgotten who we are. We need to remember. We need you." The world exploded. That was the only way Ezra could describe it later, when he had the presence of mind to try. One moment he was kneeling in silver chains, waiting for his life to be destroyed, and the next the earth itself was screaming. The sound that tore through reality was not exactly a howl, though it had elements of one. It was deeper than sound, more fundamental than noise, a vibration that existed in the spaces between atoms, and refused to be contained by anything as simple as air or earth or physical law. Every wolf in the square was thrown to the ground, not by force, but by instinct, their bodies reacting to a dominance so absolute that even the concept of resistance was impossible. The silver chains on Ezra's wrists shattered, not melted or broken but unmade, reduced to constituent particles that scattered on a wind that had not existed a moment before. The blade fell from Darius's hand, and the mighty alpha of Silverpaw was on his belly in the dirt, whimpering like a pup, his aura of power completely shredded by whatever presence had just announced itself to the world. And Ezra, still kneeling but no longer bound, felt something click into place in his chest, a recognition that went beyond logic, beyond possibility, beyond anything he had words to explain. Subscribe to this channel to follow the epic continuation of Kale and Ezra's story, where ancient legends collide with modern tyranny and two souls, separated by 1,000 years, discover a connection that defies death itself. The presence approached from the north, moving faster than anything that size should be able to move. Ezra could track it, even though he could not see it yet, could feel it like a storm front rolling across the landscape, inevitable and immense. The other wolves felt it too, scrambling away from the center of the square, piling up against buildings and each other in their terror. Darius was trying to rise, trying to reclaim some shred of his authority, but his body would not obey him. Whatever was coming carried a dominance that made the alpha of Silverpaw look like a pretender playing dress-up. When Kale Ashbourne walked into the square, the moon seemed to brighten, as if even the celestial bodies recognized his presence. He was not in wolf form, which somehow made him more terrifying rather than less. He stood perhaps 6.5 feet tall, with a frame that suggested violence held in check rather than mere strength. His hair was black, shot through with silver in patterns that looked like constellations, and his eyes were the color of molten gold, ancient and terrible, and completely inhuman despite the human face they occupied. He wore simple clothes that looked handmade, leather and fur from an era before synthetic fabrics, and he moved with the absolute confidence of something that had never learned to fear, because nothing had ever given it reason to. His gaze swept the square, taking in the cowering wolves, the shattered chains, the silver blade lying in the dirt. When his eyes found Ezra, still kneeling in the center of it all, something flickered across his expression too fast to read. Then he turned his attention to Darius, and his voice, when he spoke, was like stones grinding in an avalanche. "You are Alpha here?" Darius managed to get to his hands and knees, which was more than anyone else had managed. To his credit, he tried to meet Kale's eyes, though the effort made him shake. "I am Alpha Darius of Silverpaw, member of the Council of Seven. You are trespassing on Packlands without permission. Identify yourself, or face the consequences of your intrusion." The laugh that escaped Kale was not amused. It was the sound of something ancient being confronted with absurdity. "The Council of Seven," he repeated, tasting the words like they were rotten. How very organized, how very modern. He took a step closer, and Darius collapsed flat again, unable to maintain even that much resistance. "I am Kale Ashbourne. I ruled when your ancestors were learning to walk upright. I wrote the laws your council pretends to honor, and I have been asleep for a very long time, which is the only reason your little tyranny has been permitted to exist." The name meant nothing to most of the wolves present. It was too old, too legendary, too disconnected from their modern reality. But a few of the elders went absolutely still, and Ezra felt his heart stutter because his grandmother's stories were real. The impossible was standing in front of him, and he had no idea what happened next. Kale turned back to him, and the weight of that golden gaze was almost physical. You called me, Omega. Your distress pulled me from a sleep I chose, from a peace I earned. Tell me why I should not return to my rest and leave you all to the consequences of your choices. It was not a rhetorical question. Kyle genuinely wanted an answer, and Ezra could sense that the ancient Alpha was balanced on a knife's edge between intervention and abandonment. The truth was probably not smart, but Ezra was beyond caring about smart. He had just watched a legend walk out of history. He might as well be honest. I did not know I was calling you. I did not know you were real. I was going to die, or worse, and I reached for anything that might help. I reached for the stories my grandmother told me about the first Alpha, about Kale Ashbourne, who united the packs and made us something better than monsters. I reached for a fairy tale because reality offered nothing but pain. And what did you do to deserve this punishment? Kale's tone was neutral, but Ezra sensed the question mattered more than it seemed. I healed pups who were dying from silver sickness, Ezra said, meeting those terrible golden eyes despite every instinct screaming at him to submit. I used Omega healing magic that the Council declared forbidden 70 years ago. I broke laws that are wrong, and I would break them again, because children should not die so that Alphas can maintain control over powers they do not understand and fear to see used freely. The silence that followed was absolute. Darius made a sound like a wounded animal, probably realizing that Ezra had just confirmed his guilt to the most powerful Alpha in existence. But Kale was not looking at Darius. He was staring at Ezra with an expression that might have been recognition, or might have been grief, or might have been fury. It was impossible to tell. Omega healing magic is forbidden, Kyle said slowly. And for a terrible moment, Ezra thought he had miscalculated, that the legend was just as monstrous as the modern Alphas. But then Kale turned that golden stare on Darius, and his next words were edged with apocalyptic rage. Omega healing magic is forbidden. You take beings born with the gift to mend and nurture and connect. Beings whose entire purpose in the pack structure is to maintain the health and well-being of their communities, and you forbid them from using the very magic that defines their nature. You pervert the designation system I created to ensure balance and turn it into a tool of oppression. You take my laws, written to protect the weak from the strong, and twist them into chains. He moved then, crossing the distance to Darius in a blur of motion that ended with his hand wrapped around the Alpha's throat, lifting him off the ground like he weighed nothing. I left because I thought my presence did more harm than good, because I believed that my power cast too large a shadow for anyone else to grow. I thought that in my absence, my people would learn to govern themselves, would evolve beyond the need for a tyrant king. Instead, you created 7 tyrant kings, divided my united packs into territorial fiefdoms, and built a system that would make the monsters I fought to civilize look merciful by comparison. Darius struggled, clawing at Kale's wrist, his face turning purple. The gathered wolves watched in frozen horror, unable to intervene, unable to look away. Ezra knew he should feel satisfaction, should be glad to see his tormentor suffer. But instead, he felt only a growing dread. This was not justice. This was the fury of something that had lost everything and had nothing left to lose except the final shreds of its restraint. Stop, Ezra said, and his voice cracked on the word. Please stop. Do not kill him. Kale turned his head, those golden eyes finding Ezra again. Nye, he would have destroyed you. He deserves death 1,000 times over for what he has done, for what he represents. Because you are better than this, Ezra said, forcing himself to stand despite his shaking legs. Because the Kale Ashbourne of the stories did not rule through fear and murder. He ruled through justice and mercy. He was better than the monsters he fought. Please, if any of that was true, if any of those stories were more than fairy tales, prove it now. The moment stretched. Kale's hand did not loosen, but it did not tighten either. Then, with a sound of disgust, he dropped Darius back to the ground, where the Alpha collapsed in a gasping heap. You are right, Kale said, and he sounded tired, so deeply tired that it made Ezra's chest ache. I am better than this. I used to be, anyway. I do not know what I am now. He turned away from Darius, turned away from the crowd, and looked at Ezra with something that might have been desperation in those ancient eyes. I did not want to wake. I chose oblivion because the world without my mate was unbearable, because every breath was agony, because I had done everything I could do, and it was not enough. I earned my rest, but you called me. Omega. Your voice cut through 1,000 years of carefully constructed barriers and dragged me back into this nightmare. So tell me, what am I supposed to do now? Tell me why I should care about a world that forgot me, that turned everything I built into ashes and called it progress. Leave a comment below sharing your thoughts on this opening. Do you think Ezra made the right choice reaching out to the ancient Alpha? What do you hope happens next? Ezra had no answer, no wisdom sufficient to the moment. He was a healer from a broken pack, barely into his 3rd decade of life, facing a being who had walked the earth for over a millennium. What could he possibly say that would matter? But he tried anyway, because trying was all he had left. I do not know what you should do. I do not know if caring about this world is even possible for you, but I know that I called for help, and you came. That has to mean something. Even after 1,000 years, even through all that pain and loss, some part of you still answered a cry for help. That part of you is not dead. Maybe it can be enough. Kyle stared at him for a long moment, and Ezra watched something shift behind those golden eyes, some internal battle he could not begin to understand. Then the ancient Alpha nodded once, sharp and decisive. Very well. I will stay. I will see what has become of my legacy, and if I decide that this world is beyond saving, that the rot has gone too deep, I will return to my sleep and let you all collapse under the weight of your own cruelty. But for now, Omega, you have your help. He raised his voice, letting it carry across the square with a power that made the air vibrate. Hear me, wolves of Silverpaw. Hear me, and let your counsel hear through you. Kale Ashbourne has returned. The first Alpha walks among you again. All laws restricting Omega magic are void as of this moment. All punishment for their use is ended. Any Alpha who raises a hand against an Omega for practicing their gifts will answer to me personally, and I promise you do not want that conversation. Darius, still on the ground, managed to rasp out a protest. You cannot simply invalidate council law. We have systems, procedures. You have no authority here. Kale looked at him with something approaching pity. I have the only authority that matters, Alpha Darius. I am stronger than you. I am stronger than your entire council combined. I wrote your laws, and I can unwrite them. If you wish to contest this, challenge me. Invoke your right to trial by combat. I will be happy to demonstrate exactly how thoroughly outmatched you are. No one moved. No one spoke. Darius's face went through several interesting colors before settling on a sickly gray. Finally, one of the pack elders, an ancient female with silver hair and scars from a dozen battles, stepped forward. Her voice shook, but held steady. Lord Ashbourne, if you are truly who you claim, then you will remember the old forms. You will remember that an Alpha may be challenged not just by combat, but by proof of lineage and deed. We request the proving. Kyle's expression softened slightly, the first hint of something other than rage or exhaustion crossing his face. I remember, Elder. The proving is your right. He held out his hand, palm up, and the air above his skin began to shimmer. Light coalesced, not bright but deep, the kind of luminescence that seemed to come from beneath reality rather than above it. Shapes formed in the light, images from history, moments pulled from the memory of magic itself. The wolves saw Kyle as he had been 1,000 years ago, younger, but no less powerful, standing before a gathering of packs and speaking words that ended a war. They saw him fight creatures that no longer existed, monsters from an age of nightmare. They saw him weep over a body that could only be his dead mate. Saw him build the first pack laws on a foundation of grief and determination. They saw moments of tenderness and brutality, wisdom and failure, all the complicated reality of a being who had lived too long and seen too much. When the light faded, the silence was different, heavy with recognition and fear, and something that might have been hope. The elder knelt, and her action rippled through the crowd like a wave. Within moments, every wolf in the square was on their knees except for Ezra and Darius. Ezra was not kneeling because he was too shocked, his mind reeling from the images he had just witnessed. Darius was not kneeling because his pride would not let him, even in the face of impossible proof. Cale ignored them both. His attention was fixed on something in the distance, his head tilted as if listening to sounds no one else could hear. When he spoke, his voice was grim. "Your council knows I am awake. I can feel them scrambling, feel their panic. They will come for me, all 7 alphas, because they understand that my existence is a threat to everything they have built. This square is about to become a battlefield." Ezra found his voice. "Then we need to evacuate. There are pups here. Elders, wolves who cannot fight." "No," Cale shook his head. "Let them see. Let them witness what happens when tyranny meets the reality it tried to bury. Let them understand that the age of the council is over." He looked at Ezra, and something in his expression made Ezra's breath catch. "Stay close to me, Omega. You called me here. You are my anchor to this time. I will not let them harm you." Before Ezra could respond, before he could process the implications of being claimed as an anchor by the first alpha, the night erupted with howls. They came from all directions, massive shapes dropping from buildings and emerging from shadows, wolves in their transformed state. Enormous and deadly, the council's enforcers, sent ahead to assess and contain. They surrounded Cale in a loose circle, snarling and snapping. A dozen of the most powerful warriors in the region, and their confidence was palpable. They thought numbers would matter. They thought that even an ancient alpha could be overwhelmed by superior force. They were wrong. Cale did not transform, did not even move from his relaxed stance. He simply released his aura, let the full weight of his dominance roll, out in a wave that was less power and more inevitability. The enforcers collapsed mid-charge, their wolves unable to maintain form under pressure that vast. They shifted back to human form in a cascade of breaking bones and tearing muscle, the transformation forced and agonizing. Within seconds, a dozen warriors were reduced to whimpering. Humans curled on the ground, and Cale had not even raised his hand. "Is that all?" He sounded almost disappointed. "Is this the best your council can send? Warriors with no understanding of true power, trained to brutalize the weak but helpless against actual strength?" He shook his head slowly. "You have forgotten so much. You have lost the knowledge of what we really are, what we can be. You play at dominance like children playing at war, not understanding the real thing when it stands before you." From the south came the sound of vehicles, dozens of them, and Ezra knew the main force was arriving. The council would send hundreds if necessary, would throw bodies at the problem until it was solved. Cale had to know this, had to understand he was facing impossible odds. But the ancient alpha just smiled, and it was not a nice smile. "Good," Cale said. "Let them come. Let them all come. It has been 1,000 years since I reminded our kind why I was the first. I think we are overdue for a lesson." The battle that followed would be talked about for generations, a story that grew with each telling until it bordered on myth. But those who were there, who witnessed it firsthand, would always insist that the myths undersold what actually happened. Cale fought like a force of nature given form, moving through the council's forces like wind through grass. He did not waste energy on brutality, did not make a show of his dominance. He was simply efficient, dismantling attacks with minimal effort, breaking formations with strategic strikes, and turning the council's numbers against them by forcing warriors to choose between pressing the attack, or saving their fallen comrades. Ezra watched from where Cale had positioned him, protected by layers of magic he could feel but not see, and slowly began to understand what he was witnessing. This was not a battle. It was a teaching moment. Cale was showing the council's forces exactly how outclassed they were, demonstrating the gap between their trained brutality and his lived experience. Every move was a lesson. Every strike was a correction. He was educating them through violence, and the education was brutal. When the Council Alphas themselves finally arrived, 7 powerful wolves who had ruled their territories with iron fists for decades, they found their forces scattered and broken, and Kyle standing in the center of the square, looking barely winded. Darius, who had retreated to the edge of the fighting, stumbled forward to join his fellow council members, his face a mask of humiliation and rage. Alpha Magnus of Ironhold, the nominal leader of the 7, transformed back to human form and approached with careful steps. He was an imposing figure, gray-haired and scarred, with the kind of presence that normally commanded instant respect. Next to Kale, he looked diminished. "You have made your point, Ashbourne. You are powerful. We acknowledge this. But power alone does not give you the right to overturn centuries of law and custom. We are willing to negotiate, to find a compromise that respects both your legendary status and the reality of modern pack governance." Kale tilted his head, studying Magnus like an entomologist might study an interesting insect. Negotiate. Compromise. Interesting words from wolves who were about to sever an Omega's magic for the crime of healing sick children. Tell me, Alpha Magnus, what compromise exists between tyranny and justice? What negotiation balances the scales when one side holds all the power and uses it solely to crush those beneath them? The system works, Magnus insisted, but there was uncertainty in his voice. Now, it has kept our kind safe, hidden from humans, organized and functional. Without hierarchy, without strict control, we would descend into chaos. The system works for you, Kyle corrected, for alphas who benefit from oppressing those you classify as lesser. But I created the designation system, Magnus. I built it to describe roles, not to create castes. Alphas protect and lead. Betas support and maintain. Omegas heal and connect. These were meant to be functions, not prison cells. You took my framework and turned it into a weapon. Another of the 7, Alpha Vera of Moonshadow, stepped forward. She was smaller than Magnus but radiated cold calculation. Perhaps the first Alpha has been asleep too long to understand modern necessities. The world has changed. Humans have technology that can destroy us. We need unity, discipline, absolute control to survive. Your idealistic approach belongs to an age that no longer exists. Does it? Kyle's voice went dangerously soft. Tell me, Alpha Vera, how many rebellions have you crushed in the last century? How many wolves have you broken, exiled, or killed to maintain this unity you claim is so vital? How many Omegas have lost their magic, their voices, their lives to your discipline? He gestured to the destroyed square around them. This does not look like survival to me. This looks like a powder keg waiting for a spark. And you are all so invested in maintaining your positions that you cannot see the inevitable explosion coming. The confrontation might have escalated to violence if not for a voice from the crowd, old and cracked, but carrying authority nonetheless. The elder who had requested the proving stepped forward again, her courage remarkable given the tension in the air. Lord Ashbourne speaks truth, Council. I am old enough to remember the stories from my grandmother, who heard them from hers. Our way was not always this way. We have forgotten more than we remember, and in that forgetting, we have become something our ancestors would not recognize. Other elders began to speak up, a chorus of dissent that had apparently been waiting for someone brave enough to start it. They spoke of old traditions discarded, of ancient rites stripped away, of a time before the council when packs governed themselves with wisdom rather than fear. The 7 tried to silence them, but Kale's presence had broken something fundamental, had given permission for long-suppressed dissent to surface. If this story resonates with you, if you want to see how Kale and Ezra navigate the complex path between legend and reality, make sure you are subscribed and have notifications turned on so you do not miss the next chapter of their journey. Ezra watched it unfold and felt something shifting in his chest, a loosening of chains he had not realized he was wearing. Around him, other Omegas were standing straighter, no longer cringing in automatic submission. Betas were looking at each other with expressions that suggested they were reassessing long-held assumptions. Even some of the alphas who had fought for the council looked uncertain, their conviction shaken by the evidence of their own eyes. Change was happening, right here, right now, and it was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Kale let the dissent build, let the cracks in the council's authority widen, before raising a hand for silence. I did not return to rule. I had my time as king, and it cost me everything. I do not want that. Burden again. But I cannot stand by while you destroy what I built. So here is what will happen. His voice rang with finality. The Council of Seven is dissolved as of this moment. Pack Alphas retain authority over their own territories, but absolute rule is ended. A new gathering will be called, representatives from all designations, all packs, to build a system that actually serves our people instead of enslaving them. You have 1 month to prepare for this gathering. Any Alpha who refuses to participate or who continues to enforce the old oppressive laws will deal with me personally. Magnus drew himself up, trying to reclaim some shred of dignity. And what if we refuse? What if we choose to defend our rights as Alphas, our authority that we earned and maintained through strength and wisdom? You cannot force us to surrender power. Cannot? Kyle smiled, and it was the saddest smile Ezra had ever seen. Watch me, Alpha Magnus. Watch what the first can do when properly motivated. He closed his eyes, and the temperature dropped 10 degrees in an instant. The moon overhead brightened until it was almost painful to look at, and from Kyle came a pulse of power that was not dominance, not violence, but something far more fundamental. It was pack magic, the original binding, the thread that connected every wolf to every other wolf, the foundation upon which their entire species was built. Kale seized those threads, all of them, every single connection in a 100-mile radius, and he pulled, not to control, not to command, but to remind. Every wolf felt it, felt the truth of what they were beneath all the artificial hierarchies and cruel laws. They felt the memory of belonging, of being part of something larger than themselves, of a time when pack meant family instead of prison. When Kyle opened his eyes again, his power receded, but its effect remained. Wolves throughout the territory were staring at each other with new eyes. Old certainties shattered. Questions, forming that had no easy answers. The seven stood frozen, their auras diminished, their absolute confidence broken. They had just been reminded, viscerally and undeniably, that their power was borrowed, conditional, granted by the very system that Kale had created and could unmake if he chose. You feel it now, Kale said quietly. You feel how fragile your authority really is, how much it depends on everyone agreeing to play by rules that benefit you. I could strip you of your positions with a thought, could reduce you to betas or omegas if I wanted to be truly cruel. I could rewrite the fundamental magic of our species and leave you powerless. I will not do these things, because that would make me the tyrant you have become. But never, never make the mistake of thinking I cannot. Alpha Darius, who had been silent throughout the confrontation, finally found his voice. It came out broken, desperate. What do you want from us? What would satisfy you? Change, Kale said simply. Real change, not superficial reform. I want omegas freed to use their gifts. I want betas recognized as equals rather than servant class. I want alphas to remember that strength is meant to protect, not oppress. I want a world where my mate's sacrifice meant something, where the peace we built together has a chance to actually flourish. His voice cracked on the last words, and for a moment, the ancient alpha looked unbearably human. I want to believe I did not fail completely. That is what I want. And if you cannot give it to me, then I will burn your council to ash and build something new from the ruins. The silence that followed was absolute. The seven looked at each other, communicating in glances and subtle gestures. Finally, Magnus inclined his head in the smallest of bows. You will have your gathering, Lord Ashbourne. We will participate. What happens after that remains to be seen. That is all I ask, Kale said, and the weariness in his voice was profound. Now leave. All of you. Take your wounded and return to your territories. We will speak again when the gathering is called. The council departed with their forces. a ragged retreat that looked nothing like the confident arrival they had made. Darius lingered longest, staring at Ezra with an expression that mixed hatred and something that might have been fear. "This is not over, Omega," he said quietly. "You may have the First's protection now, but power fades, and memories are short. When he returns to his sleep, we will remember." "If he returns to sleep," Ezra replied, surprised by his own boldness. "And if we are all still alive when that happens, maybe the world will be different enough that your threats mean nothing." Darius left without another word, and suddenly the square was quiet, except for the pack members who had witnessed everything. They stood uncertain, waiting for direction, for permission to react. Kyle turned to face them, and his expression softened slightly. "You have questions. You have fears. Both are justified. But tonight is not the night for answers. Tonight you should rest, tend your wounded, and think about what kind of future you want to build. We will have time for discussions and decisions in the coming days." The crowd began to disperse slowly, wolves helping each other, whispering in small groups, their minds clearly racing. Ezra started to follow them, unsure of his place in all of this, but Kyle's voice stopped him. "Not you, Omega. We need to talk." They walked to the edge of the square, away from listening ears, and when they were alone, Kale sagged against a wall with a tiredness that went beyond physical exhaustion. Up close, Ezra could see cracks in the legendary Alpha's composure, could sense the vast effort it had taken to maintain that display of power and certainty. "Are you all right?" Ezra asked, which was probably a stupid question given the circumstances, but he could not think of anything better. "No," Kale said honestly. "I am not all right. I have not been all right for 1,000 years. And tonight did not magically fix that. But I am awake, and I am here, and apparently I still care enough to be angry about injustice. So I suppose I will endure." Ezra studied him in the moonlight, this legend made flesh, and saw past the power to the person beneath, saw the grief that still lived in those golden eyes, the exhaustion that went bone deep, the desperate hope warring with crushing despair. "Why did you really come?" he asked softly. "You could have ignored my call. You could have let me die and returned to your sleep. Why did you choose to wake?" Kale was silent for a long moment, his gaze distant. "When Aldrich died, when I lost my mate, I wanted to follow him into death, but I was immortal, or close enough, and death was not an option available to me. So I chose the next best thing, hibernation. A sleep so deep it was almost death, almost peace. I built barriers to keep myself there, to prevent anything from waking me. Those barriers should have been absolute, but I broke them," Ezra said, guilt coloring his voice. "I pulled you back against your will." "Yes," Kale agreed, "but that should not have been possible. The magic I used was specifically designed to filter out distress calls, to prevent exactly this kind of awakening. The only thing that should have been able to reach me was a call from my true mate, and Aldrich is 1,000 years dead." He turned to look at Ezra directly, his expression troubled. "So either my magic failed in ways that should not be possible, or your call resonated on a frequency it should not have been able to reach. Either way, it means something. I do not know what yet, but it means something." Ezra felt his heart rate pick up. "Are you saying we are mates? That is impossible. You said yourself that your mate is dead, and I can feel that I do not have a mate bond. This does not make sense." "No, it does not," Kale agreed, "but very little about tonight makes sense. An Omega with enough power to breach my barriers. A call that resonated with magic older than pack laws. A connection I can feel but cannot explain." He reached out slowly, giving Ezra time to pull away, and placed his hand over Ezra's heart. The contact sent a shock through Ezra's system. Not painful, but electric, as if something dormant was trying to wake. "You are important, Ezra Moonwhisper. I do not understand how or why yet, but you are central to something larger than either of us realizes. That is why I came. That is why I will stay, at least for now, because the universe does not wake sleeping gods on accident, and I need to understand what game is being played before I decide whether to participate." He pulled his hand back, and Ezra immediately missed the contact, which was alarming in its own way. "What happens now?" Ezra asked. "Do I just go back to my life? Pretend tonight never happened?" Kyle laughed, short and sharp. "Your life as you knew it is over, Ezra. You called the, First Alpha, witnessed the breaking of the Council's power, and stood at the center of a historical moment. There is no going back. More than that, I meant what I said. You are my anchor to this time. I do not fully understand this world yet, do not know its customs or technology or unspoken rules. You will help me navigate it, teach me what I need to know. In exchange, I will protect you and help you develop your gifts properly. The Omega magic you used tonight was impressive but untrained. With proper guidance, you could be extraordinary." "I am not a diplomat or a teacher," Ezra protested. "I am just a healer. I do not know anything about navigating politics or guiding legends." "Which makes you perfect," Kale said. "I do not need someone who knows how to play political games. I need someone honest, someone who will tell me truth even when it is uncomfortable. Someone who still believes that healing is more important than power. You did not call me to save yourself, Ezra. You called me to save the pups. That matters." Before Ezra could respond, a young female voice called out from across the square. "Ezra, are you okay? We saw everything, and Mom said I should not come out, but I had to make sure you were all right." A girl, perhaps 12 years old, came running toward them. She was one of the pups Ezra had healed, one of the children who would have died without his intervention. Ezra caught her as she barreled into him, wrapping his arms around her in a fierce hug. I'm fine, Maya. Everything is fine. You should be resting, though. You only finished healing yesterday." "I feel great," Maya insisted. "The silver is all gone. You saved us, Ezra. You saved all of us." She pulled back and looked up at Kale with wide eyes. "Are you really the first Alpha? The one from the old stories?" Kale knelt down to her level, his expression gentling in a way Ezra had not seen before. "I am. And you are Maya, one of the pups Ezra risked everything to heal?" She nodded, enthusiastically. "He is the best healer in the whole pack. Maybe in the whole world. He can make any hurt go away." "I believe you," Kyle said seriously. "And I think you are very brave to come out here after everything that happened tonight. Your pack is lucky to have wolves like you." Maya beamed at the praise, then turned back to Ezra. "Mom says I need to come back now. But I wanted to say thank you. For everything." She hugged him again, then ran back toward the buildings where anxious parents were waiting. When she was gone, Kyle stood slowly, his eyes following her retreating form. "That," he said quietly, "is why I came. That is why I will stay. Because a world where healers are punished for healing children is a world that needs to be unmade and rebuilt. And maybe, just maybe, I still have enough of my old self left to help with that rebuilding." Share your thoughts in the comments on this powerful moment. What do you think will happen as Kale and Ezra navigate this new dynamic together? The weeks that followed were unlike anything Ezra had ever experienced. Kale took up residence in the Silverpaw Packlands, not as Alpha, but as something without a clear title, a presence that everyone felt, but no one quite knew how to address. He spent his days learning about the modern world, asking endless questions about technology and politics and social structures that baffled and appalled him in equal measure. Ezra became his guide and translator, teaching him to use smartphones, explaining the internet, and helping him understand how dramatically the world had changed in a millennium. But the education went both ways. Kale taught Ezra proper Omega magic, techniques that had been lost for centuries, ways of working with natural energy and pack bonds that made Ezra's previous healing look crude by comparison. He taught him about the old pack structures, about councils that actually served their people, about a time when strength and compassion were not considered mutually exclusive. And slowly, carefully, he taught him about Aldrich, about the mate he had lost, and the grief that had driven him to choose oblivion. He was Beta, Kale said one night, as they sat under the stars, his voice soft with memory. Not powerful in the traditional sense, but wise beyond his years. He saw connections I missed, understood hearts in ways I never could. He made me better, made me more than just a warrior king. When he died, betrayed by wolves I had trusted, lost more than my mate. I lost my conscience, my compassion, my ability to see anything beyond revenge. How did you pull yourself back? Ezra asked. How did you stop yourself from destroying everything? I did not, Cale admitted. I got very close. I slaughtered everyone involved in the conspiracy, tore apart entire packs in my rage. It was a young Omega, not unlike you actually, who finally made me see what I was becoming. She stood in front of me while I was mid-rampage and told me that Aldrich would be ashamed of what I had become, that I was dishonoring his memory with every life I took in his name. That reached me when nothing else could. I stopped, rebuilt what I had broken, and then chose to remove myself before my grief could cause more damage. Do you regret it? Ezra asked, choosing sleep instead of continuing to lead. Cale considered the question seriously. I regret that my absence allowed tyrants to rise. I regret that the systems I built were corrupted in ways I should have anticipated. But I do not regret the sleep itself. I needed it. I was broken, Ezra, in ways that time alone could not heal. Maybe I still am. He turned to look at Ezra, and the vulnerability in his expression was startling. But something is different this time. Being awake still hurts, but it does not hurt in the same way, and I do not understand why. Ezra understood, or thought he did, but he was too afraid to voice it. The connection between them had grown stronger over the weeks, deepening into something that defied easy classification. It was not a mate bond, they had both confirmed that, but it was something. Some thread that pulled them together, made them seek each other's company, left them both feeling incomplete when separated for too long. Ezra told himself it was just gratitude, just the natural result of the strange circumstances that had brought them together. But late at night, when he was honest with himself, he knew it was more. The gathering was approaching, representatives from packs across the continent, preparing to descend on neutral territory for the historic meeting. Cale spent increasing amounts of time in preparation, working with the few council members who had genuinely committed to reform, drafting proposals for new governance structures, and trying to find diplomatic solutions to centuries of accumulated resentment and injustice. He was exhausted most days, pushed to his limits, trying to build consensus among wolves who agreed on almost nothing except their distrust of change. Ezra found him one evening in his temporary quarters, surrounded by papers and maps, his head in his hands. I do not know if I can do this, Cale said without looking up. I thought I remembered how to lead, how to unite disparate factions toward common goals. But that was a different age, a different world. These wolves do not trust me. Half of them think I am a fraud. The other half think I am a tyrant waiting to happen. I have no credibility, no support base, nothing but raw power, and I already proved that power alone is not enough. Ezra sat down across from him, carefully moving aside a stack of proposals. You have more than power, Cale. You have truth. You have history. You have the courage to admit when you are wrong, and the wisdom to learn from mistakes. That matters more than you think, does it? Kyle looked up, and his eyes were haunted. Or am I just an old ghost pretending to relevance, too stubborn to admit that my time has passed? Maybe the council was right. Maybe the world has changed too much, and my ideals are just nostalgic fantasy with no place in modern reality. Stop, Ezra said firmly. I have watched you these past weeks. I have seen you work yourself to exhaustion trying to find solutions that serve everyone. I have watched you listen to wolves whose opinions you hate, compromise on things you consider fundamental, and still wake up every day committed to making this work. That is not a ghost or a fantasy. That is leadership. That is exactly what this world needs. Kyle stared at him, something shifting in his expression. How do you do that? He asked quietly. How do you look at me and see anything other than a relic? I am over 1,000 years old, Ezra. I have killed more wolves than you have met. I chose death over facing a world without my mate. What about that inspires confidence? All of it, Ezra said honestly. You are ancient and deadly and grieving, and you still came when I called. You still chose to help even though it cost you your peace. You still care enough to try. That is not weakness. That is the most powerful thing I have ever witnessed." He reached across the table and took Kyle's hand, the contact sending that now familiar electric sensation through his nerves. "You asked me once why you should care about this world. I think you have found your answer. You care because you cannot help it, because even through 1,000 years of grief, even through deliberate attempts to stop caring, you still have enough compassion left to be furious at injustice. That part of you is not dead. It is just wounded, and wounds can heal." Kyle turned his hand to grip Ezra's, his hold gentle despite the strength in it. "You remind me of him," he said softly, "not in appearance or personality, but in the way you see the world. Aldrich could always find hope in darkness, could always believe that people were capable of change. I thought that kind of optimism died with him. But here you are, proving me wrong. I am not trying to replace him," Ezra said quickly. "I know I could never—" "I know," Kyle interrupted. "That is not what I mean. Being around you reminds me of who I used to be when he was alive. The version of myself that believed building things was more important than destroying them. I thought that version was dead, that I had buried him along with my mate. Maybe I was wrong." They sat in silence for a moment, hands still clasped, both of them aware that something significant had shifted, but neither ready to name it. Finally, Cale pulled back, his professional mask sliding back into place. "We should rest. The gathering starts in 3 days, and we will need all our strength." The gathering itself was chaos from the first moment. Hundreds of wolves from dozens of packs, all crammed into a neutral meeting ground, all carrying generations of grievances and conflicting agendas. The Council of Seven tried to maintain control, but their authority was fractured, undermined by Cale's very presence. Omegas attended in numbers unprecedented in modern times, freed by Cale's declaration and determined to have their voices heard. Betas formed their own coalition, demanding recognition as equals, and the Alphas split into factions, some supporting reform, others clinging desperately to the old ways, still others trying to use the chaos to advance their own power. Cale presided over it all with patience that Ezra knew cost him dearly. He listened to hours of arguments, mediated disputes that threatened to become violent, and slowly, painfully, guided the assembly toward actual policy decisions. The breakthrough came on the 4th day, when an ancient Omega named Thorn stood to speak. She was nearly as old as the council system itself, bent with age but fierce in spirit. "I was there," she said, her voice carrying despite its frailty. "I was there when the Seven first formed, when they promised that unity required sacrifice, that Omegas giving up their autonomy was temporary, just until the human threat passed. They said it would be temporary. That was 273 years ago." She turned to face the council members present. "You have built empires on our backs, consolidated power that was never meant to be consolidated, and called it protection. But we do not feel protected. We feel enslaved. And if this gathering cannot change that, then it has failed before it started." Her words broke something open. Other Omegas began to speak, sharing stories of abuse, of gifts suppressed, of lives constrained by laws designed to keep them powerless. Betas added their voices, talking about being treated as lesser, about having their contributions dismissed, about watching their children sorted into hierarchies that determined their worth before they had a chance to prove themselves. Even some alphas spoke up, younger ones mostly, admitting that the current system had warped what leadership was supposed to mean, had turned them into tyrants when they wanted to be guardians. Kyle let it continue, let the floodgates open, understanding that this catharsis was necessary. When the testimonials finally wound down, when the room had exhausted its immediate pain, he stood. The gathering fell silent, all eyes on the ancient Alpha. "You have spoken truth," he said simply. "All of you. The system is broken. It was broken before I woke, and my intervention has only exposed cracks that already existed. We cannot repair this with minor adjustments. We need fundamental change." Alpha Magnus stood, his face carved from stone. Easy words from someone who will not have to live with the consequences. You will return to your sleep eventually, Lord Ashbourne, and we will be left to manage whatever chaos you create. Forgive us for being cautious about revolution proposed by an immortal who can simply walk away when it becomes inconvenient. You are right, Cale said, and the admission shocked the room. I am immortal, or close enough. I can walk away. I have walked away before. But I am here now, and I am proposing changes that I will enforce personally for as long as necessary. If that means decades, so be it. If it means centuries, I will endure. I will not abandon this transition halfway and leave you to collapse under its weight. Why? It was Alpha Vera who asked, her skepticism plain. Why would you commit to that? What do you gain from binding yourself to a world that forgot you? Cale's eyes found Ezra in the crowd, held his gaze for a moment that felt eternal. Because someone reminded me that caring is not weakness, that choosing to help is not failure, and that the wounds we carry do not have to define us forever. Because 1,000 years ago I thought removing myself was the answer, and I was wrong. Because this is my legacy being perverted, my laws being twisted, my life's work crumbling, and I will not stand by and watch it happen again. The reforms passed that day were not perfect, not even close, but they were a start. Pack Alphas retained significant authority, but that authority was now balanced by councils that included all designations. Omega magic was legally protected, with harsh penalties for anyone who tried to restrict it. The designation system was reframed officially as describing roles rather than worth, with legal protections against discrimination, and the Council of Seven was formally dissolved, replaced by a rotating leadership council that no one faction could dominate. More importantly, Cale did not claim formal power. He positioned himself as arbiter and enforcer, the being who would ensure the new systems were followed until they became strong enough to stand on their own. It was a masterstroke of politics, giving him authority without seeming to grasp for it, making him protector rather than ruler. The celebration after the final votes was subdued, but genuine. Wolves who had been enemies began tentative conversations. Old grudges did not disappear, but they were acknowledged as things that could be worked through rather than eternal truths. And in a quiet corner of the gathering ground, Ezra found Cale standing alone, staring up at the stars with an expression of profound exhaustion. You did it, Ezra said as he approached. You actually did it. You changed the world in less than a month. We did it, Kyle corrected. This was not my victory alone, and it is not finished. Implementation will be the real challenge. Wolves will resist. Old habits will reassert themselves. This is just the beginning of a very long struggle, but you will see it through, Ezra said with confidence. You promised centuries if necessary. You meant it. I meant it, Cale agreed. Though I confess I do not know how I will endure it. 1,000 years alone taught me that I am not good at existing for existence's sake. I need purpose, connection, something to make the endless march of time bearable. Last time I had Aldrich. This time, he trailed off, but Ezra heard what he did not say. This time you have me, Ezra finished softly. If you want. I know I am not your mate, not Aldrich, not anything close to what you lost. But I am here, and I care about you, and maybe that can be enough. Cale turned to face him fully, and in his ancient eyes, Ezra saw fear and hope warring for dominance. I do not want to dishonor his memory by moving on. I do not want to cheapen what we had by trying to recreate it with someone else. Then do not recreate it, Ezra said. Build something new, something that honors the past without being imprisoned by it. Aldrich would not want you to suffer forever in his name. He would want you to heal, to find joy again, if possible. And maybe I could help with that. Not as a replacement, but as something different. Something that belongs to this age, to who you are now rather than who you were then. You do not know what you are. Offering, Cale whispered. I am difficult, Ezra. I am broken in ways that do not heal easily. I will have nightmares and dark days and moments where I forget why I chose to keep going. Being close to me means shouldering that burden, And being close to you means learning magic I never dreamed possible, Ezra countered. Means being part of something larger than myself. Means watching you slowly remember how to smile without grief shadowing every expression. I have seen glimpses of who you are, beneath the pain, Kale. I want to see more. I want to help you find your way back to yourself, if you will let me. Kale reached out slowly, cupping Ezra's face with a gentleness that belied his strength. I do not understand what we are to each other. It is not a mate bond, but it is something that pulled me from sleep, that keeps pulling me toward you, that makes the world bearable when it should not be. I am afraid of it, afraid of what it means, afraid of losing something precious. Again, then be afraid with me, Ezra said. Be uncertain and damaged and struggling. But be those things while we figure this out together. You do not have to have all the answers. You do not have to be perfect. You just have to be willing to try. The kiss, when it happened, was tentative and careful. A question more than a statement. But it deepened as Kale pulled Ezra closer. As centuries of loneliness met desperate hope. As two broken souls reached for each other in the darkness and found unexpected light. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Kale rested his forehead against Ezra's and laughed, the sound shaky but genuine. I am terrified, he admitted. I am absolutely terrified of this. Good, Ezra said. Means it matters. Means it is real. They stood together under the stars, and for the first time in 1,000 years, Kale Ashbourne allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, his story was not over. That there might be chapters yet unwritten, joys yet unfound, a future worth living for beyond mere duty and obligation. It would not be easy. The road ahead was fraught with challenges, political and personal both. But he would not walk it alone, and that made all the difference. If this story moved you, if Kale and Ezra's journey resonated with your heart, please leave a like and let me know in the comments what you would like to see next in their continuing adventure. The epilogue takes place 5 years later. The reforms have taken root, not without difficulty but with genuine progress. Omegas practice their magic openly, their gifts celebrated rather than suppressed. Betas hold positions of real authority across pack territories. Alphas have begun to understand that strength without compassion is just cruelty with better branding. The world is not perfect, far from it, but it is better, measurably, undeniably better. Kale still serves as arbiter, still intervenes when necessary to ensure the new systems are respected. But his interventions have become less frequent, less dramatic. The packs are learning to govern themselves with wisdom rather than fear, and Kale is slowly allowing himself to believe that maybe this time his legacy will endure. He and Ezra have built something together that neither fully understands, but both cherish, a relationship that is equal parts partnership, romance, and mutual healing. They are not mates in the traditional sense, but they are bound nonetheless, connected by choice rather than destiny, and that choice makes it more precious rather than less. They stand together on a cliff overlooking Silverpaw territory, watching the sunset paint the sky in colors that remind Kale of ages past. Ezra leans into him, and Kale wraps an arm around him automatically, the gesture as natural as breathing. Do you ever regret it? Ezra asks. Waking up? Giving up your peace? Kale considers the question seriously, as he considers all Ezra's questions. Sometimes, he admits, there are days when the weight of existence feels crushing, when I remember everything I have lost, and wonder if any amount of progress is worth the pain. But then I remember why I woke. I remember you, calling for help across 1,000 years. I remember making the choice to stay, to try again, to believe that maybe I still had something to offer. And I look at what we have built together, the changes we have made, the lives we have touched, and I think maybe this is what healing looks like. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of purpose. Not forgetting the past, but refusing to let it dictate the future. That is very philosophical for someone who claims to be a simple warrior. Ezra teases, and Kyle laughs, the sound free and unforced. I learned from the best, he says, pressing a kiss to Ezra's temple. You have taught me how to live again, Ezra. How to find joy in small moments. How to hope without demanding guarantees. How to love without fear consuming everything. I will never stop. Missing Aldrich. Never stop carrying that grief. But I have learned to carry it alongside new joys, rather than letting it crush all possibility. That is your gift to me. And you gave me courage. Ezra replies. Showed me that one voice can matter. That standing up to tyranny is not futile even when it seems impossible. You taught me that healing is not just closing wounds, but creating space for growth. You are my impossible legend made real, and I love you for it. They kiss as the sun sets. Two souls who found each other across impossible odds, who chose each other every day, despite all the reasons they should not work. Behind them, the packlands are settling into evening routines, wolves going about their lives in ways that would have been impossible 5 years ago. Children play without regard for designation hierarchy. Omegas teach healing classes openly. Alphas consult with their councils before making major decisions. It is not utopia, but it is progress. And progress is enough. In the distance, barely audible, a wolf howls. Not a call to dominance or a warning of danger, just a celebration of existence. A joy given voice. Others answer, and soon the night is full of song, wolves singing simply because they can, because they are alive and together and free. Kyle listens with his eyes closed, feeling the bonds that connect his people, feeling the health of the system he helped rebuild. Your howl shook the stars, Ezra murmurs. The night you woke. Every instrument in the world registered it. Scientists are still arguing about what caused the phenomenon. It was rage, Kale says. Rage at being called back. Rage at what had become of my world. Rage at the universe for refusing to let me rest. But also, underneath that, it was hope. The desperate, terrified hope that maybe my story was not over, that maybe I could make a difference one more time. The stars shook because I was making a choice, Ezra. I was choosing to care again, to fight again, to live again. And the universe felt that choice reverberate through every atom. And now? Ezra asks. If you howled now, what would it be? Kale opens his eyes, looking at Ezra, at the packlands below, at the future stretching out before them full of challenge and possibility both. Now it would be gratitude, he says. Gratitude that someone cared enough to call me. Gratitude that I was brave enough to answer. Gratitude for every difficult day and small victory and moment of unexpected joy. The ancient Alpha fell to silence, yes. But silence is not the same as death. Sometimes silence is just rest, just gathering strength, just waiting for a reason to sing again. You gave me that reason, Ezra Moonwhisper. You and all the wolves who refused to accept that the world had to be cruel. You reminded me that my voice still matters, that my howl can still shake stars. But more importantly, that sometimes the most revolutionary act is simply choosing hope over despair. They stand together. As night falls fully, two souls who found each other in darkness and created light, who took broken pieces and built something beautiful, who proved that legends can wake, that change is possible, that love can bloom even in grief's shadow. The ancient Alpha is silent no more, and his song, carried by his Omega's voice alongside him, echoes through the packlands and beyond, a promise and a challenge and a celebration all at once. The age of tyranny is ending. The age of balance is beginning. And Kale Ashbourne, the first Alpha, the legend who chose to wake, stands at the center of it all, no longer alone, no longer drowning in the past, finally ready to build a future worth living for. Thank you for joining Kale and Ezra on this incredible journey from ancient legend to modern hope. If you want to explore more stories of supernatural romance, redemption, and the power of choosing love over fear, subscribe to this channel and share your favorite moments in the comments below. Your engagement helps these tales of transformation reach others who need reminders that even the deepest wounds can heal, that even the longest darkness can end, and that choosing to hope is always the most courageous thing we can do.